You're watching part 3 of my video series on troubleshooting and repairing the air suspension in a W109 Mercedes-Benz. I have my own 300 SEL 3.5 up on the lift here, and I'm getting ready to pull the leveling valves. I'm going to ship them off to get them rebuilt. And I highly recommend that you watch part 1 and part 2 so you can get the background of the frustrations I'm having with this car, along with a little bit of the theory of how this system operates. It's all mechanical. It's kind of an interesting system. In some ways it's complicated, in other ways it's not. But there are problems, and we're on the quest, or should I say I am on the quest, to get this thing fixed once and for all. So when I go out to the garage, it's sitting up, not down. Okay, you got it? That's my goal here. Now, these leveling valves are located, there's 3 of them. There's one in the back, right in the center, and it connects to the rear sway bar with the link. And then there's 2 leveling valves located right here on the front suspension, left and right side. Now, getting to these leveling valves, the rear one's okay. The front ones are kind of hard to get to. I would hate to have to do this job on the ground. In fact, I've done it before on the ground with the car jacked up. So it would be very difficult to film down there, so we've put it up in the air. Plus, you know, I don't want to crawl around anymore. I want to be able to stand up when I'm pulling these valves. But I want to begin this part of the video by talking about the importance of cleanliness. These valves get very dirty. There's going to be a lot of road grime, sand, dirt, crud on them, and you do not want to let any of that dirt get into those air lines once they're removed from the valve. You're going to have to remove multiple hard lines from the fittings on the valves, and you're going to have to unbolt the valves from the car, and you need to be careful. You just need to think cleanliness, and the best way to do that is to thoroughly clean the valves before you even start wrenching on them. What I like to do is I like to use one of my favorite cleaners. Once again, I don't want anything like solvent or something real smelly up in here. So I like to use Purple Power or Super Clean in one of these spray bottles, and I can pump it up using a little drip pan like this right here. I can spray the valve thoroughly, and I just put enough cleaner on. I don't have to spray all over the shop here. That's why I just love these little pumper bottles for cleaning. And then I'll take a brush and really brush these out. If you look back here at the rear valve closely, you can see I've already cleaned it. Look at how clean it is. And after, you know, spraying it and scrubbing on it, I'll go ahead and use the other bottle that I have with fresh water, rinse that down, and then use compressed air to dry it off. And then when this valve is completely dry, we'll come back and I'll show you how we're going to get these valves out safely and efficiently. I'll start here with this rear leveling valve because it's a little bit easier to film. It's a little bit more out in the open. You'll be able to see how I use the wrenches to get these hard compressed air lines off the valve. You know, it's not sometimes very easy to remove these. In fact, I feel very sorry for anyone that has one of these W109s that's been exposed to road salt or has a lot of rust under the car, because if you have rusty lines, you're going to have a big problem, and it could turn into a really big wrench dance. And replacing all these hard lines is not easy. And the most important thing when you go to remove them is you want to start the nut turning, and you do not want the line to move with the nut, because if it does, you're going to either damage or break those lines. So the first thing I do, it doesn't matter whether the car is rusty or not, is I'll come in maybe an hour before I plan to loosen the fittings and spray them completely down with something like PB Blaster or Croil oil or even liquid wrench, just to soak the line, soak the fittings, and let it sit. If you come back, like you see here, look at me trying to work on this front one here, and I didn't soak it just because I wanted to show you. And look what's happening when I'm trying to loosen up the nut. And if that's happening to you, if that nut is moving and at the same time the line is moving with the nut, you want to stop. Just stop what you're doing and put more penetrant on it and keep soaking it until it will move. If it won't move, you may have to use some heat, and after that, you know, all bets are off. You may have to cut the lines off and replace them if they're badly seized or rusted to those fittings. As far as wrenches, I highly recommend that you use a flare nut wrench. The flare nut wrench will go on that nut, and it will allow you to get a better grip on it. If you use a normal open-end wrench on those, it's very easy to round off the corners, and then you're going to have a hard time getting them on and off. Along with a 12 millimeter flare nut wrench, you're going to need a 14 millimeter open-end wrench to get a hold of that upper fitting that goes into the leveling valve body itself. So watch what happens if I don't have a 14 and I just plan to use a flare nut wrench. When I put that wrench on there and start turning it, look at that. That upper fitting is moving in the housing. So you have to find a way to lock that in. And sometimes they're on so tight, what I do is I position these wrenches like this. See that? They're fairly close together, but it allows me to get both hands on the wrenches, and it allows me to squeeze them together like that. And that's going to pop it loose. And then I can use, once I get it loose, you usually don't have to hold on anymore with that 14 millimeter. And you can see, particularly on the front valves, this is going to be a real challenge because some of these line fittings, you do not have a whole lot of room to work. So you're making real short little movements with your flare nut wrench and trying to work. And once you get it loose, if you can wiggle it like this, you can usually get it the rest of the way out by hand. And that saves a little bit of time too. Now when it comes out, this is the next thing that's real important. We talked about cleanliness, we talked about using the proper wrenches. But the next thing is extremely important. You do not want to take these and just bend them out of the way. If you just take them and reef on them and, oh, I'm just going to get this line out of the way, when you go back to reinstall it, you're going to have a very hard time getting those threads started into the leveling valve body. So just use a little extra care. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull down on this and just lightly pull it aside. See that? I didn't bend it, so that the alignment is still straight into that valve when I go to reinstall it. Now, I'm going to go to work. This is going to take a while, so I'm not going to film the whole process. But I will remove all the metal hard lines first, and then I will remove this leveling arm here. You've got this little pin that has to come off, and then there's two bolts right here that hold the valve itself to the bracket here in the back, and I'll remove those. When I get all these off, we'll come back and we'll show you these three valves on the bench and talk a little bit more about what we found in this whole process and what we plan to do with them when we get ready to ship them off to Martin. The leveling valves are off and they're ready to pack up and ship out for overhaul. This isn't a real easy job, by the way. You know, the rear one was fairly easy. The right front wasn't too bad, but you get up to that driver's side front valve, and let me tell you, it has more lines coming into it, and it's real tight right around the steering box there, and some of those fittings were very difficult to get on. So if you ever take on this job, I'm going to recommend that you get a couple extra 12 millimeter open-end wrenches that you can kind of modify to get on some of those fittings. I ended up having to use a crow's foot wrench. Once we got it loosened up, I could get a crow's foot wrench up in there and just, keep turning that fitting to get it out. And, you can take we had to cut a wrench short to get up in there, and you might have to bend the head of one. So that's the challenge. It's going to be the driver's side valve to get out of the car. Now I looked these over. There's no obvious damage you can see other than when you look, there's an O-ring down in each one of these fittings that seats that hard line. Make sure it doesn't leak, and there's a couple of those O-rings that are pretty badly torn up. So when we get these valves rebuilt, we've got to install new O-rings. So in the next part, Martin has agreed to film taking these valves apart. This is going to be really interesting. If you've never seen the internals on one of these leveling valves, it is quite interesting. Martin's going to have these laid out on the bench. He's agreed to take some pictures for me, and then we'll get a little narration from him talking about some of the challenges that he's faced trying to rebuild these so they'll work properly, and they'll work properly for a long time. So stay tuned to the next part in this series.